Hi everyone, it's Koby Stevens here. I just want to jump in quickly and say a massive thank you for joining us. For almost a decade, I was fortunate enough to play Australian rules football, before in 2018 I had to retire after a string of concussions.
And Koby Stevens has revealed his regret at keeping concussion symptoms a secret.
The Remade is a series born from that journey. Over the last 5 years, I've travelled the world searching for healing and meeting some of the most inspiring, resilient, and courageous people I've ever known. People who've not only challenged the way that I see the world, but people whose stories deserve to be told. And just quickly before we get into this episode, I need to say a massive thank you to our major sponsor, Licci, a visionary non-profit building the first ever community designed for adults living with TBI. Their mission? To offer more than a place to live, but a place to grow and belong. If this message resonates with you, visit villalicci.org to support the movement.
On my last deployment to Afghanistan, driving these high-speed assault crafts, we would do 40 knots in 10-foot seas. I had two really bad loss of consciousness concussions on those. One where I actually sheared off my night vision on the battery box and woke up in the back of the boat. You're 26 miles out to sea with a severe concussion in 10-foot seas. You're not, the mission doesn't stop. You just kind of stand up and keep going. There's no book, first of all. Like, how to handle this is like, there's parenthood in itself. I'm like, I wish I was back in Afghanistan getting shot at, because at least I got a response. Like, I can figure that out. Like, when the pull is there and the darkness is enveloping you, the little gremlin that made me so stoic that, I wouldn't quit in buds or in Hell Week, like, whisper to that gremlin, like, we need some help. Now is the time.
So how you been, brother? Where are you at the moment?
I am in my basement in Erie, Pennsylvania.
You in winter yet?
No, we're summer up. We're getting to summer up here. We just finished the.
Oh yeah, sorry, you're coming out.
Yeah, the dark ages is what I call it.
Yeah.
From January to April are the dark ages here in Erie, and then the sun comes out and it's heaven until about October.
Yeah. Did you get any skiing in?
I did, actually. We have a little resort here. I got to rip around at Peak and Peak. It's where I grew up ski racing, and then I got out west one day to Big Sky. So I was there for one day and it was a powder day, so I couldn't complain.
You're tripping, bro. That's sick.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I was doing a bit of research the other night, and I knew you were a bad man, but far out, man. Your accolades are incredible. So what? You spent 17 years in the SEALs, was it?
Yeah.
17 years in the SEALs, like, credible amount of accomplishments there. Can you, like, what made you want to be a SEAL, man?
When I was a kid, my younger cousin and he was growing up in Africa with his dad. Our moms are sisters, and our grandfather was an old World War II vet. He was in the Navy, and he was on Saipan and Okinawa, and it was one trip in the summer. We would get together for a couple of weeks, and our grandpa was kind of our hero. And he told us about frogmen. And I was a swimmer. I'd been on the swim team since I was about 6, swimming competitively. And he told me about these guys that had knives and swim trunks and masks and fins, and they swam. They swam and planted explosives underwater. And then they came back to the USNS boat that they had launched from, and broke into the officer's liquor stash and sat on the gunnel and watched the explosions go. And my grandpa, I just was intrigued by this whole frogman, like, I guess the romantic frogman idea of, swimming ashore with a knife in your teeth with a pair of fins. And I don't know, it was, that's how it started. And both my cousin and I, we were about 12. We said, that's what we're going to do. And we both ended up in the teams, and he's a retired operator as well.
Was that the reality of it when you got there?
No, I mean, you never know. It's been such a crazy ride I think that's the one of my best friends in the team said to me the other day, we have we call frogmen, and then there's SEALs. And my friend said to me, he said, frogmen are all souls and SEALs are all ego. And the frogman job has always been the one that the part of it that was romantic for me, and that was the water. And I think just every you get in thinking it's one thing and it ends up being something else, and some of it's better and some of it's worse. I wanted to swim around, and then you end up running around in the desert, and there isn't, the only water you see is in a water bottle. But
Or spending a month underwater in a submarine.
Yeah, and then I got to do a tour with the undersea component as well, and that was my favorite. Launching from a submarine and swimming and diving, and that's where my passion was.
Yeah, so I want to be as respectful as possible when trying to dive into that. Can you take us through a bit of that journey? Like how long you did 17 years, and some of those tours that you did?
Yeah, I enlisted right out of high school. In high school I was a swimmer. I played soccer, and then in the springtime I was a pole vaulter. And don't ask. The only reason I tried pole vault was in the spring, track and field was the available kind of sport, and I didn't want to run distance. And at the time, I wasn't all that fast, and I couldn't jump that high, and so I just started vaulting. And I got really passionate about pole vaulting, and I ended up I won the state championship in Pennsylvania, and I had some scholarships to some Division I schools, and then I was so passionate about being a SEAL. So I enlisted and went through boot camp in 1996, December of 1996 or 95, and then went in January 96. Went right to SEAL training at 18, and was in class 208. And I graduated 6 months later, the following December. So basically a year from the time I enlisted. And then I went to SEAL Team 8. I spent about 3 years at SEAL Team 8, and then I applied to the Naval Academy, which is our commissioning. I promised my dad, he said, you can go be a SEAL, go be a frogman, but make sure you get a degree somewhere. And so the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, they also had a Division I track team. And so I called the track coach and said, hey, I used to be a 15-foot pole vaulter, and I'm a SEAL. And I asked an admiral, who's in charge of the SEAL teams. His son was my swim buddy in training, and I asked Admiral Smith if he would write me a letter of recommendation. And at the time, I had no idea that Admiral Smith was captain of the track team when he was at the Naval Academy, and he found out I was a pole vaulter. And next thing I know, I was headed off to the prep school and then the Naval Academy, and I walked back on the track team. I ended up jumping 16.3 my freshman year and broke the freshman record. I jumped my sophomore year, and then I wanted to be on a team again, so I walked on the rugby team. And so I ended up starting A-side on the rugby team, playing wing, and I had a blast. I just fell in love with playing rugby. And my last 2 years at the academy, and during those 2 years, 9/11 happened, and it was obviously a pivotal time. I walked out of Middle Eastern politics into this place called the Heart Room, and I watched the first or the second plane hit the towers. And then I went to a class called Friendship and Death, where we watched. Just ironically, in that class we watched the towers fall. And the next 2 years were really prepping for wrapping your head around what was coming. And I graduated in 2003. We had just invaded Iraq. I was selected to go back to the SEAL teams. And right upon graduation, I went out west to the West Coast SEAL Team 1. And was shortly after that, I found with some refresher training, and then I found myself in southern Iraq. And between 2001, I made a couple more deployments to Iraq during that time in Afghanistan. And then I got my orders out to Hawaii, where I was in the undersea component. the SEAL delivery vehicles, driving mini submersibles, which was a totally different change. I went from the deserts to launching from a nuclear submarine and a uh, battery powered submersible on a rebreather, being piloted by Windows 95, and did a tour out there, and then I got selected to go to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, and I worked in the mobility arm. I was a mobility guy at SEAL Team 1 as well. We were kind of new to the whole mobility stuff back early on. The SEAL teams, we weren't allowed to have vehicles. So early, when Afghanistan kicked off, we were the littoral warfare. So guys, you come out of the water, and then the first few miles inland, and then anything beyond that was the Army. And so when Afghanistan kicked off, it was we got introduced to this new world of, you're going to drive Humvees and vehicles, and so when I went back, I love that aspect of it. So I got into the mobility. So I went out to Dev Group at that point. I was driving boats and trucks and 6-wheeled up armored vehicles, and I made a couple more deployments. On my last, so I made 6 total on my last deployment to Afghanistan. Going out for an op, I got IED'd under my seat and got knocked out. And it wasn't a cat. We still continued mission. We changed a tire on it on the Pander, and then we came back. That was Christmas Eve, and that ended up being my last rotation. With the concussions, it was blast effect. It was that IED, and then also driving these high-speed assault crafts. We would do 40 knots in 10-foot seas, which was mission requirement. And I had a number of, I had 2 really bad loss of consciousness concussions on those. One where I actually sheared off my night vision on the battery box and woke up in the back of the boat. So it was, and then you're 26 miles out to sea with a severe concussion in 10-foot seas. You're not, the mission doesn't stop. You just kind of stand up and keep going. And as multiple concussions back to back are really what I guess leads to the major problems. I came back from that, and that's when I started having really bad symptoms. Just didn't know where I was, driving to work on Sundays when I was supposed to be going to the grocery store, and self-medicating. And really, that was kind of, I got the opportunity. I found, fortunately, there was one other SEAL who I was rooming with at the time, Morgan Luttrell. He had been through this place called NICO, which was the National Institute, National Intrepid Center for Excellence. And NICO was the only center for excellence in the U.S. military for traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And so I went there kind of thinking, I was done. I was like, well, I can't really do my job anymore. I was scared of getting people hurt because I couldn't. It was like, as you kind of lose the ability to remember anything. I couldn't read emails. And then I went through that, and I had a miraculous, that was one of the most life-changing parts of the journey, because I met my neurologist there, and it was, I was there for 4 weeks. I got 93 doctor's appointments and 5 MRIs, and it was holistic integrated healing. But more importantly, I got explained what was going on in my brain, and why the injuries happened the way they did, and why I had the injuries that I had and the symptoms that I had, and how to treat the problem and not just mask the symptoms. So that was a really fundamental time. I did 1 more year, and then I got out, and I had 3 children at the time, and moved on to the next phase of my life, which was making even more bad decisions with my brain, trying to.
Yeah, dude, I always think, what was the actual cost of those brain injuries, and when did they start? So I remember when we were in Washington last year, like, this huge part of being a SEAL is like the training and the blasts and all that sort of stuff. And they're finding now that it's a massive part to why these, small blasts are affecting the brain. Like, what was the cost of that when you come home?
Yeah. So when I was there, I put together a presentation called The Blast Effect. And it came out of my discussions with my neurologist. And when I boiled down to was, your brain is like a city, right? You have gray matter, white matter, and the gray matter of the buildings, and the white matter of the streets and the sidewalks. And when you're passing energy through the cortex, your brain is just sitting in water, and it doesn't compress, right? And so you're passing energy through this cortex, and what happens is whether it's a blast, whether it's a gunshot, whether it's a close air support, whether it's a breaching charge, a regular concussion where you have bad parachute landing, but that the jarring and the torquing of the brain inside of your skull, has damage to the that white matter, and the white matter, when it's damaged, your body releases stem cells to repair it. And what they found at NICO was that chronic stress, chronic pain, and lack of level 3 and 4 sleep, that actually kills off the stem cells trying to repair your brain. And you have this kind of stair-stepping of symptoms which continue to get worse over time. And if you were to fly over Washington, D.C. on 9/11 and you look down and saw the Pentagon, that is a sports concussion. That's like, when you're taking a heavy hit, on the football field. You can go back and see where you got hit, and oftentimes you can figure out what kind of symptoms you're going to have based on the location of where that hit was, right? If you were in Washington, D.C. on August 23rd, 2011, like I was for funerals from Extortion 17, I was there during the earthquake, and when the earthquake hit, we were in the middle of a eulogy, and the plaster fell from the ceilings, and everybody shook. We all moved to the sides. If you flew over Washington, D.C., you wouldn't see any problems, but the damage was on an order of magnitude greater on August 23rd because there was infrastructure damage, cracks to the Washington Monument, cracks to the streets and the sidewalks, gas lines broke, but it's not overtly visible, if that makes sense. But the same thing with your brain. When you're passing this energy through these cortexes, there's these micro tears in different parts of your brain, and they affect different things. And if you kill off those stem cells while they're trying to repair, then multiple blast exposures start to add up over time, and then the symptoms get worse and worse. And that's where we have this. Guys aren't. You eat a breaching charge, and then maybe you throw some close air support in that night, and then 6 months later you're out on a boat, you get knocked out, and all of a sudden, but you're in this constant state of I'm up all night, I sleep all day, so I flip-flop my circadian rhythm. You're obviously in chronic stress, and most of the operators are a little bit older, and we all have injuries, bad shoulders, knees, the deal. Like guarantee you never played a game where you weren't hurt, right? You weren't hurt. You weren't injured, right? Like there's the difference when they're like, are you injured or you're hurt? Because if you're injured, you can't play, but if you're hurt, you can gut it out. And so we have this, my generation, we were there at the beginning of the war, and then 12 years later, it's the same group of guys who were doing hundreds and hundreds of combat operations and all these blast exposure in this massively stressful environment with no sleep and chronic pain. And I realized at that moment, like, prior to COVID, I was like, we have a pandemic. Like, if I'm having these problems, then I know I'm not the only one. And when I came back from NICO, I went to one of the squadrons at the team I was at, and I said, can I give you guys a brief, on where I went, this place called NICO, and a bunch of guys that I went through buds with and training with. And so I told him what I just told you. And I said, this is kind of what's going on. And when you get these systems of like, the other piece is oxygen. When you get into hypoxic environments, they were having it. We found that guys that had ejections from F-18s, they'd have no symptoms. But then when you do partial pressure oxygen test, the HAPS testing, high altitude partial pressure test, guys would pass out. So the symptoms become exasperated in these different environments. So I gave this brief to the guys. I said, this is what's kind of going on. And every guy in the room raised their hand. They're like, I got all of that. And what was interesting was I was shocked at the moment. But what I said was, is bad as it is, it can be fixed. But you have to break the sleep cycles. You got to break the chronic pain cycles. And when you do that, you put yourself in that spot of healing, then your body can repair itself. And that was kind of the kickoff, right? I think when I got out of the teams, I looked around the Navy, and I was, especially at that moment in Naval Special Warfare, I was seeing my friends. I was getting phone calls. How do I get here? Where do I get help? My wife and I would go talk to the SEAL teams coming back. They would do, post-deployment retreats with the families, and we would talk to the families about the issues that we had. And I would talk about my symptoms, and every wife in the room would look at their husband and like poke them, like, you guys are all the same going through all of this. And that I just became passionate about educating guys, because it when you don't know it can be fixed, or it feels hopeless. And when you start losing edge of, I remember trying to go through close quarters combat again in some training, and I was, people were talking to me, and I couldn't remember anything they were telling me. It was so bad that I was putting a rock in my shoe to remind me that I had to do a certain movement. Like I was trying to Band-Aid it so much. And it just got to the point where I when I got out, I was so relieved, because I was scared that I was going to get somebody hurt. That was my biggest fear, was like, I'm going to be in charge and this is going to go. And you know what I mean? Like
what did it feel like to be in an environment like that, where everything's just so, I guess, radicalized in terms of everything you're doing, and you're in fear? Because I remember in my last game, I played a whole game in front of 60,000 people with blurred vision, man. And I would never felt more vulnerable in my life.
Well, you also know this, the plays, the movements, like your routine. And I found that, I learned this when I was a pole vaulter. Your routine is key. If you want to be great at anything, it's always about the details and making sure your kit's squared away. It's making sure that, your gun's prepared and your stuff is in the right spot. And so what happens is a lot of, when you get really good at something, whether it's operating or sport, a lot of it's on automatic, right? People look at you and you look like you're fine, but then, and you might be able to do the movements, and you've done it so many times, you're running the plays, and they're like, oh, Koby's fine. Pete's doing great. But the reality is the part of, the part that makes you great at anything is above the neck, right? And then you're not great, right? You can fake it only so far. And I think the fear for me was, I was faking it. I knew a lot of my buddies were faking it. But then when you get into those moments where it's like, okay, I got to stack planes and coordinate air support and start moving on Casevacs and Medevac. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, because I can't remember, strings of numbers. And so, the fear at that moment was overwhelming. And so when I got out of it, when I stepped away from it, it was like, okay, like it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, even though I felt like I was a failure. I felt like but now that I reflect on that a lot more, I can remember during that time, it was when the Bin Laden mission happened, and we killed Bin Laden, and I remember sitting alone in my living room, and I just kind of had an emotional dump, and in my mind I was like, okay, I'm done. Like, my generation took it as we were here when it started. We took it to this point, and I think I put all of that. I was able to just like turn the page at that moment. But it's that fear. It's that fear of letting other people down, letting your teammates down. And then there's also that fear and that realization that you're replaceable. As good as you are, there's someone that's coming up behind you that's better, faster, smarter, stronger, and healthier, and they can do the job. And I think that's part of the next phase of things, where you go through that. Athletes and veterans alike go through this moment where your key card doesn't work and you can't get into the room where all your buddies are at, and that support structure isn't there. and that's when you go into phase 2, which is depression, self-medication, woe is me, what do I do next, what am I good at, and then it hit me bad. And yeah, I think at that moment it was like, well, I'm gonna I went and climbed Denali with a couple other SEALs, and we skied it. I started getting back into skiing, and I was like, oh, I can do this again. Like, oh, I'm gonna go ski big mountains again. I'm just gonna prove that I can do this. I can do something hard. And it was really me battling with my ego during that time, and it was very self-destructive and self-medicating and trying to find my place in the world. Fortunately, I've always been a musician, and my neurologist at the time said, hey, listen, playing music is actually really good for your brain. And so I started writing music again. And so it was in this, like, try everything, do everything, try to find footing somewhere. And then people's expectations of you as being who you were, like, oh, you're a professional football player, you were a Navy SEAL, you can perform at this level. And then there's also that fear that, like, I don't know if I can anymore. What can I do? And when I was skiing, I hit my head again. I had another concussion, and that was a very, like, okay, maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe not jumping off of a 60-foot cliff is a good idea. Maybe just skiing is nice. Let's, putting things back into perspective. I think that's the next phase of it.
Apart from, like,
and
apart from the brain injuries, like, I can only imagine you carried, like, a lot of emotional stuff from being over there. And was there's something that you brought back that you really struggled with, or?
So when I got through I started feeling a lot better after the TBI. And if you look at the symptoms of traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, there's a comorbidity between them. There's a lot of overlap. And there's a lot of overlap with low testosterone as well, if you look at that. So you have these pieces. But at that time, I had never had any PTSD stuff. I was like, this is all my brain, and I'm just going to keep working on stuff. And it wasn't until about 5 years after that I got hit with, like, a train wreck of PTSD. And it was like everything just got torn apart. And I was back at beyond square zero. I was back in a hole, and it was really a powerful depression. Like I think that's what hit me the first time. People always say, like, oh, I'm depressed. But until you have real depression, it's hard to have empathy for people who say they're depressed and suffer from depression. And that's what really hit me. And, the suicidal thoughts that were very real, and, you've all of a sudden fighting with these demons that were, they were winning. If I'm going to be honest, like, that was a battle that I thought at the time I was like, I could get through anything, like, I'm a frogman. Like, I've made through buds. Like, it's just a mental battle. Being in that world is all about being mentally tough. And then when that depression hit me, I was robbed of that last, like, little piece of, I have that. And that's when I hit rock bottom. And fortunately, I had a couple of my friends call me and say they knew what I was going through, and they said, we're going to go. Very, very, very much frogman-like in your community too. I got the phone call, and my friend says very quietly, I love you. I said, I love you too. I said, we're going to go and do the world's most powerful psychedelic drugs. and I was like, cool. When do I sign up? He's like, we're going in a week. I'm like, all right. And then immediately following that, the same operator, athlete mentality, like, I'll try anything twice. I was like, has anybody done this? Can we talk to somebody? Right. And that actually, that put me on my second journey, which was about 5 years ago, which was, going through psychedelic-assisted therapy. And I've been through a number of times. And that opened up another world of healing at a very fundamental level and a spiritual level that has been beyond life-changing.
Yeah, I think I've only dabbled in psilocybin, but you went and did ibogaine, right? Like what did you
Yes.
what did you know about that before you went into it?
Well, this was, I guess, 6 years ago now, and it was 2019, and I didn't really know anything about it. I knew it was I had been afraid of psychedelics my whole life because we kind of grew up in that time frame, our generation, where it's like, I remember being a kid and people like, oh, if you go on a trip, you can just it can never end. And there was all of this propaganda that had been put out, post 1960s, Timothy Leary, like all of that post, anti, this is your brain on drugs. You go down this road, you'll never come back. So I had that in the back of my head, and I was like, I'm never touching that stuff. And I tried microdosing on psilocybin, and I had a really positive effect. And so I had no idea what ibogaine was. I knew it was like a tree bark from Gabon, Africa, and then it was like, okay, well, what's that going to be like? And it was one of those. I actually called a friend of mine. I said, "Has anybody done this?" And at the time, probably only a handful of other SEALs had done it. And I called one of my friends, who actually I was on one of my last actual combat missions with, and I said, what's this like? And he gave me a quick rundown, and that's a crazy story. The part of that, the healing that has come out of that, even that conversation was absolutely mind blowing. But that was like, well, why did you become an operator? Why did you, when you start looking at like, why we got into these jobs in the first place? And I started realizing that, we all came from this childhood trauma. And that trauma isn't what happened to you, like we were abused, but trauma is what your body does in response to, event. And growing up, and a lot of guys have a major, life-changing event when they're children. And I always call it like that. When you're about 25 or 26, you should have that feeling that nobody's coming for me. And that's when you kind of grow up. You have that overnight, like, okay, well, I got to make something of myself. But I found that with operators and a lot of successful athletes, that thing happens when you're 5 or 6 years old. You lose a parent, or there's something very traumatic, and that solidifies a different kind of mindset in life, a drive, if you will. And so that's really like then the next 5 years kind of came in like unpacking why I ended up in the teams. And I started seeing more of these similarities between athletes and operators, who, we had these, and to get us to start to talk about, emotional stuff and, get undressed emotionally that's very hard to do. But, the medicines, they'll destroy that ego. And,
but it wasn't easy. Hey, it wasn't easy. I remember we were talking about it. You had to go back and you see some pretty wild stuff during that healing and that journey with that medicine, right?
Yeah, everybody's experience is different. And I'm not saying it's not the fix all for everybody. But it's certainly, it's like for us, like whatever the nuclear option is, like, well, we'll take that.
Yeah.
Like, what's the hardest, most miserable? I think Jerry Seinfeld says it best. He's like, there's no regular strength aspirin. There's maximum strength. Like, so whatever's the maximum allowable dosage that'll kill me, like, give me that and just back it off a little bit.
Yeah. And what was it, dude? It was like 13 hours, right?
Yeah. The first time I did ibogaine, I think the first 6 hours, you're kind of on your back. You're not going anywhere. And actually the first 12 hours, but it's a one-way conversation, the first 6 hours. And then the next 6 hours, it's like sitting with a stern father, and you start dealing with some harsh truths, and a lot of the trauma that you were going through, you didn't know that you went through, that were traumatic for you. Really, I think it's the hitting of the fight or flight button. And when you're really young, you internalize emotions. It's a vibrational piece, and you're internalizing emotions from the people around you and what you learn. And I had lost my mom when I was 10 months old. And then I had my first stepmom left when I was 6. And I didn't realize like the depth of that had affected me until I was in that place that the medicine took me. And now it's like, okay, we're going to open this can of worms. And once you unpack that, and then it's like, now it's the process of unpacking that, which has been life-changing and ongoing. But I wouldn't trade anything for where I am now.
If you can talk about it, what was one of the worst things you had to go unpack from like the stuff you were doing?
Well, you know what's interesting is 99% of everything was not the war. It was the childhood stuff that led me to the job, which led me to the war, which was like, you got a backpack full of kit and you're running around and everything's fine. And then, someone throws, a 6-ounce water bottle on top of it and then you can't carry it anymore. Right. And I think that what I didn't realize is that I talked to a bunch of other guys that have been through this, the stuff from our childhood that led us to the job was the majority what was in the backpack, and the war really just was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I think that to me is like that every time I sit down with other guys, it's the combination of the blast exposure, it's a combination of the childhood, it's a combination of the driven personality that leads us to the job, and then leads us to that unpacking of it all. If you're gonna be, it's a spiritual component. Really, is the part that I think was the most. So you can have a belief in God, but then for me, it went from believing to knowing, and that's a game changer. That realization that we're spirits having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience, and we're here learning lessons. And that just unlocked, like that part of the journey really unlocked the next, I don't know, just kind of like a revelation, if you will. And I was able to shed a lot of the stress that was constantly. I could figure out what the triggers were that would force me to, and then learn how to sit with it and deal with it. And it's like 20 years of psychotherapy in 12 hours.
That must be pretty brutal, man. I remember you saying you woke up and it just felt like your brain had just been washed.
Well, the Ibogaine is interesting. Like everybody, we have this thing it sounds weird, but it's like you feel like there's these like little nanobots running around your body repairing things, and you can feel it in your head. And they've done an observational study with Stanford now at like pre and post Ibogaine, and they do functional MRIs, and they're showing that brain health for one treatment of Ibogaine, you're going back 1 to 5 years with just what the medicine does physically, and it lights your brain up like a Christmas tree. And all of a sudden the synapses, everything's firing. These parts of your brain that weren't firing, your amygdala that was in overdrive for as long as it was, is now, that's reducing in size, and you're getting all of these neural connections. And so I really think that even though the physical effects that they're still researching right now on Ibogaine have, they address the traumatic brain injury and the post-traumatic stress. And it's really that comorbidity. Like what is that? It's a combination of the physical and the emotional, kind of having this this train wreck. And it's athletes, it's veterans and athletes and artists and anybody who's on the edge. Anybody who's on the edge of things and you're pushing the limit, you're going to find the wall. And at some point, and that's how you become, you're driven enough to find the wall, and then you're driven to, bang against the wall until you find a way around it. And that comes at a price.
That price, you've lost a lot of friends, right? And I've listened to some of your music and it's pretty raw and honest, and it's about that journey. Was that something that was a big healing part of your journey as well, music?
Yeah, a huge part of my journey was music. It still is. I'm staring at my guitars right now. Uh, being, writing is, you're kind of, it's like rooting around in your darkness. And a lot of my early stuff was really dark. And some of it, so I used to joke around. I was like, I'm gonna have to put like a 1-800, like a suicide awareness hotline on my music. It's like a warning, like, don't listen to this if you're in a bad state of mind, because it's gonna take you to a worse place. Uh, but even just being open and honest about it, I would get. I used to hate playing in front of other SEALs. I always say, like, singing in front of SEALs is like being a wounded zebra running through a pride of lions. Yeah, but the irony was, as I would doing that, I think, right? Not I think, I know I had a lot of guys call me in their dark moments, and I could help. I think I helped a lot of my friends, get the courage to ask for help, and start down a healing path. And just being, I really think that being open and honest about our injuries helps our communities, because it's like, there's a book called The Nightingale Song, and it's about all those Naval Academy graduates, John McCain and Oliver North, and the premise is that a nightingale, it'll only sing if it hears another nightingale singing, and I saw that always stuck with me from the academy. It was like, well, if I'm feeling this and I've been through this, and I start singing, then maybe I'm going to hear another nightingale somewhere. And if somebody hears me, then maybe they'll start singing too. And eventually we can, have a, chorus.
That's exactly right. But is there, like, when you think back, is there a friend you've lost, like, their story should be heard or told, and, something that we need to really think about? I don't know if you want to talk about it or not.
We've had a lot of suicides, and that one was that. There's a couple that are very hard for me, because a lot of times with operators, there's not a lot of attempted, if that makes sense. Like in our communities, we don't really attempt a lot of things. We just do it, and because of that, they come out of nowhere, and it's the guy that you think everything's fine, and then they're gone. And I think that for me is that's the hardest one. It's like you make it through all of this, and you get through this career, and then you have these families, and I just hope that what's done is done. We can't change that, but what I'm hoping is that we can, by talking about it and bringing awareness to it, that we can find the right words at the right time to stop another one. I mean, with 22 right now a day of veterans in the U.S., which is just baffling to me. But things are changing, right? We're bringing awareness to psychedelic-assisted therapy. We're trying to get it into the active duty service for the families and the operators. And if you can get ahead of traumatic brain injury by you can't. I think that the problem is that if you say it's a problem, then you have to address it as such. If you start trying to address it in the job, then you're just going to stop the job. So, right, it's like, well, nothing in here is not going to cause traumatic brain injury. Like getting on the field, playing, football, you're going to end it. Well, that's not going away. War is not going away. So what you can really do is educate people as to, looking at like monitoring sleep with wearable devices, looking at, cortisol levels and blood markers, and you can try to mitigate and optimize the guys as they move along. You can start potentially doing psychedelic-assisted therapy at different points in their careers so they can be optimized for the job, right? Like,
I love hearing that, man. It's so funny. Me and Bill had this conversation the other day. We as soon as he flew into America, there was like an hour segment on the radio as we're driving home, and it's all about concussion in our sport because it's a huge issue at the moment. But it was pretty much a hit piece, and it really, I sit there and I kind of hate that commentary, and it's coming from people who probably have never played at that level, and it's like, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to stop tackling? We're just going to change the sport completely? No matter what we do, it's never going to change. There's always going to be these things, but hearing you say that is everything I think about. What are we doing to, once it does happen and before? And that to me is like the most important part.
Yeah, if you were to sit both of us down prior to and say you're going to get a bunch of concussions and you're going to have this stuff that comes afterwards, it wouldn't have changed what I did. It's not like I'd be like, well, then I'll just go, be an accountant. Like, that wasn't in my destiny. That wasn't in my wiring. That wasn't in my DNA. Like, war is, I think there's a quote, only the dead have seen the end of war. Like, it's going to be here. It's not going anywhere. And if you're going to go on the battlefield, and I've always said this, and my kids ask about war, I'm like, if you're going to go to the battlefield, be the best. Like, go get the most training so you're the most prepared. Like, if you're going to do something, do it, right? Like, that's not going away either, right? Sport is sport. Like, it is necessary, and sport is just a byproduct of war, right? I mean, the Olympics came from, like, instead of killing each other this year, let's just, let's get together and see who can run the fastest in our armor, right? Let's wrestle. Let's, you get all these aspects of war that became sport. And it's like the things that you took away from from football, what I took away from rugby, but the things you take away from sport are the most valuable life lessons I'll ever take away. You get to learn who you are. Like, and you can't rob somebody of the opportunity to explore the limits of who they are as a person in this, once you're here one time in existence. Like, that's what we're here to do. So I get upset too. I'm like, you're never going to end it, but that doesn't mean we can't, talk about it and put out potentially mitigating treatments. If you have the discussion, you're open about it, and then you tell people, like, hey, these are symptoms, and these are treatments to this. These are biomarkers to look for. Like, these are ways to mitigate. The big problem is, and the same with your sport and with operators, is I got to cover it up and lie about it until it's catastrophic, and then all the bad stuff happens. That's where the suicides happen. That's when the guys, then they're off the cliff because they had to hide it all these years. So if we can just acknowledge it and then pull guys off the field when they need to for a short amount of time and get the treatment that they get, then you can put them back in. You can sustain, like, you can sustain a career and not have that catastrophic cliff that you hit.
Do you think that's like the truth that no one wants to hear about at all?
Yeah, but I think you also, when you involve, standard care, you involve lawyers, and you insurance, and you get to this, like, the no gets louder, right? Like, we just got to stop. Like, American football. I've always said, to mitigate concussions in American football, we need to have youth rugby because you learn how to tackle. That's a game changer when this. You're not playing with any pads. You're going to tackle a little bit different with when you don't have a helmet on than when you have a helmet on.
Yeah, and you learn to protect yourself as well better. Like, I was talking to a friend about it the other day, trying to take tackling out a kid's sport, and I get it, but if you're going to go play at that elite level, you need to know how to protect yourself, and that starts, when you're a kid.
Yeah, it's techniques and it's like anything else. If there's a problem and people are scared, fear turns into no. And that's not the right answer either. As a parent, that, like, as a parent, like, I sit with my kids and I see the same drive that I had, and I see the same disregard for safety that I had, because there's a reason I watch, the Roadrunner, and I definitely like saw Wile E. Coyote strapping himself to a rocket, and I'm like, I get it, man. Like, like there's kids are wired like that, and then but you're all you can do is say like, well, let's just try to mitigate it a little bit and educate them. But you can't say no. I think that's the problem. The problem is you push it down, it comes out sideways. You say no here, then it's going to come out over here, right? Like that's but our society is very fear based, and we saw that during COVID. It's like, so then the natural reaction is, well, just don't talk about it, and it's not there, and that's not the answer either. So it's like, what's that sweet spot?
And I would love to talk about you being a father, and you're a super dad. Your son's one of the biggest actors in America at the moment. But how was it when you come home from war, come home from overseas and being in a war environment, and you talk about it? I watched an interview the other day. You struggled as being a father and a husband, and what's the changes been since like you've gone on this healing journey from then to now and seen your son do what he does?
Yeah, I was just having it's Mother's Day, and we just had like a family kind of talk, and it was a very emotional talk, and it was about our lives and stuff, and my son, when he was younger, when he was 10, he said he wanted to be an actor, and I kind of approached it the same way I approached being a musician or being a SEAL, and you break it down into little pieces, and he had some amazing success, and now he's he stars in a show called Percy Jackson. He's Percy, and our life over the last few years, he was in the Atom Project with Ryan Reynolds, and that really kicked it off. And then we've had this ongoing Disney series with like 3 billion streams, and just crazy. And I think that the thing that has been, there's no book, first of all, like how to handle this is like, just parenthood in itself. I'm like, I wish I was back in Afghanistan getting shot at, because at least I got a response. Like I can figure that out. Like, it's like, I think Chesty Puller, who's an old Marine, he said it in Korea. One of his young lieutenants came up to him and said, "Sir, we're surrounded." And he said, "Well, that simplifies things. It's just fire in every direction." And that's kind of what life is like now, being a parent in this situation. But I feel like the best part of this has been that not being afraid to be transparent about my struggles and the places that has taken me, and the dings and the healing and the consequences. And I have an 18-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old, and a 14-year-old. 2 years apart, just like Navy deployments. They haven't been like this healing process, even though it's been difficult to say the least. It's also been one of the best opportunities to help like mentor, and in that level of transparency about consequences for your actions. And when you're God, this is, I think I cried like 2 hours today. It's been an emotional day. No, and it's great. It's actually it's great, because it's given me an opportunity to be. I didn't have a really great childhood, and I was alone all the time, and now I have this family, and it is it's very, sometimes it's hard. They look at you and you're like, well, you were this, like, in their mind as a kid, they see you as like Superman, and you're supposed to have all the answers, and every dad has it. And I thought in my head, like, well, I got to go do all this stuff. So when I'm a dad, because I didn't really have anybody to, like, I got to go do all this stuff. So I have all the answers for them when they're ready. And what this journey has allowed me to realize is that you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to have an answer. And that can be, I don't know, but I'll find out. And what, being able to say I'm wrong. You know, the ego is the most destructive force in human history. It's also been the most productive force in human history. It's a double-edged sword, and it will take you to places. It makes you unreasonable, to get to the pinnacle of any sport or anything, whether like you're like, again, you're an artist or an athlete, like to get to the next level of anything, you have to be completely unreasonable, and you have to be someone who is okay with failing and then getting back up. And it has, like, everybody always looks at the success at the end. They go, oh my God, well, that's great. Look at this. You were just successful. And they're like, well, yeah, you don't realize all the pain it took to get to that moment. Right. And going through the concussions and the healing and the spirit and the psychedelic-assisted therapy and the spiritual stuff has allowed the spiritual awakening has allowed me to take the ego that I needed, that was important to do the job that I was doing. You have to be unreasonably confident in your abilities to kick a door in the middle of the night or jump out of an airplane on night vision goggles. Like, you have to be unreasonably confident to do the things that we do, to walk out in front of 60,000 people and play extremely complex sport. Like, you have to be unreasonably confident and a big ego, and that takes you places. But it's also, if once you're done with that, it can become the most destructive force, because it makes you unreasonable and you deny things that are right in front of your face. You're like, well, we'll just fix it. We'll get through it. We'll get through it. And that doesn't work with parenting, and it doesn't work with marriage. And so, like, I'm so thankful for the injuries and thankful for the failures now, because it's when I'm wrong and I screw something up, or I say something the wrong way, I'm not afraid to walk in and go, I fucked that up. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm human. How can I do this better? And I found that without those injuries and without the experience, I wouldn't have the humility to say those things in a loving way, and hope that I can meet my kids where they're at and earn their respect, not just because I was an unreasonable athlete or an operator, but I learned how to put the genie back in the bottle. And when you get into entertainment with my son, like, I can see the pitfalls, right? You can see where this can be a bad thing. You can see where it can get out of control. And I see so much of myself in him as that young 18-year-old going to Buds or being a vaulter or playing rugby or being the SEAL teams. Like, I can see that in him. And I can also say, I can tell you where that's going to lead you. And I can tell you the parts you do need and you don't need. And I think that's really the blessing that came out of all of it is, God makes you into who he needs you to be. And then if you're willing to explore the healing, then he'll heal you. And I really, I look at our situation now and I'm like, I could have never imagined this would have happened and we'd be where we are dealing with the things we're dealing with. But at the same time, it shifted my perspective as to, like, what's really important. And now I see my job as, I had a good friend of mine who said, the only thing you can take with you from this life is the souls of your children. And if you raise them correctly, they'll behave in a manner that you're going to get to see them again on the other side. And I get emotional just thinking about that, because because then it's not about, now it's not about money. It's not about anything. It's about like, I just want to make sure that I I save myself and I save them, and they get, or I put them in a position where they have the self-awareness, because I want to see them on the other side. And so now it's like, I don't like the I guess the entertainment world and that whole world, like, they don't have anything I want other than, like, you can potentially push him off the course, and life in general for any of my kids, right? And so it's it's blessed me with that perspective to approach things in a way that I did not have the capacity to approach them prior to the all the bad stuff, but it ended up being all the great stuff.
Yeah. And what about, so I'm going to just leave it on this, Pete. It's like, if someone's listening to this, and I know when I went through it, my darkest period was based off the fact that I didn't think I was going to get better. And maybe one day, my kids will be looking after me. And I think that's still this very real reality of what we're dealing with, whether it's, going from concussion and then the emotional issues that go through it. If someone's listening to this, what would you say to them with the journey you've been on, and going to do these things like psychedelic treatment, which, I've found great healing in as well?
Hold fast, and ask for help. Just hold fast and ask for help. Don't, when the pull is there and the darkness is enveloping you, lean on, there's people that will help you, and that little gremlin inside you that's stubborn, like, I can do this, that the little gremlin that made me so stoic that I wouldn't quit in buds or in Hell Week, like, whisper to that gremlin, like, we need some help. Now is the time, right? Like, like, checking out is not the option, and there is a way out. There is a light. I think that's the part that, like, if I could look back to myself at that moment, like, it's that road. The best advice I ever got was from Admiral Smith, who was one of my heroes, and I was debating on whether I was going to go to the Naval Academy. I just made it through SEAL training, and I'm like at the SEAL team, and I got apartment, and I'm just cool, and like, I'm this young frogman, and they're like, all right, now start over and go back to the Naval Academy and shave your head and pull your socks up and memorize the weapons forward aft on an Arleigh Burke destroyer and go to school, which I was like scared to death of. And I'm like, well, I'm already a SEAL. Why would I go back through that? And Admiral Smith said to me, when you're forced to make a decision in life, always choose the hardest path. It's always the right one. And I told my boys that, and my daughter that tonight, and I said, every single time I've taken the shortcut, it's always been the wrong decision. And every time I've taken the hardest path, it's always the right one, without fail, every time. And so when you're in that moment, and the darkness is coming to find you, and you know that the hardest path is not turning away from the darkness, but turning into it, it's turning into the storm. Like that's the moment. And take the hardest path and find the thing that you're most afraid of. Go face that now. And it's going to have nothing to do with the sport that you played, or the job that you had, or, the thing that broke you. It's going to be it's going to be that little thing inside of you that caused you to run in that direction in the first place. And just, I think about that all the time. And any way you can find the divine light in yourself is the right way. Like any way in is right. Like any way in, find one or make one, but hold fast and don't succumb to it. Because you don't know what is in store for you. Like, God, he puts us in these positions because he's refining you for something bigger and better, and you might not think that in the moment, like, well, I'm a professional athlete at the pinnacle of my game. Like, what could ever be bigger and more important than this? And the moment that I had that awakening inside of me, and I saw that, like, my job was to, it wasn't even like this existence was just, it was the game, and I was here to save souls of my children. Like, I was like, thank you. Thank you. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know, I think that's just hold fast, man. Any way in.
It's amazing, man. Thanks, Pete, for joining us, man. It's been incredible. It's good to see your face again. Hopefully we'll go over there soon, bro.
I know. Let's get together, man.
It's been too long, man.
Let's go skiing.
The Remade series is brought to you by our partner, Licci, a non-for-profit building the first ever community for people living with traumatic brain injuries to live on their own with dignity and support. If you believe in second chances and a safe space for TBI sufferers, visit villalicci.org to make a donation and learn more. Hi, and before you take off, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the YouTube page.